Gas prices just moved higher in overnight trading. What happened today changes the immediate risk profile of this conflict. President Trump confirmed that U.S. forces successfully extracted the second crew member from the downed F-15E Strike Eagle, shot down over Iranian territory on Friday. The officer, a highly respected colonel serving as weapons systems officer, is now safe and sound after sustaining injuries. Trump called it one of the most daring search and rescue operations in recent U.S. history. At his direction, dozens of aircraft supported the mission deep behind enemy lines. The first crew member, the pilot, had already been recovered the day before. This just changed everything. For 3 days, the fate of an American airman behind Iranian lines hung in the balance. His recovery without additional U.S. casualties removes a major propaganda and bargaining leverage point from Tehran. But the operation itself, conducted inside active Iranian airspace, signals a new level of direct U.S. commitment. Most people are missing this. The rescue didn't just save a life. It demonstrated that Washington will go deep into contested territory to protect its personnel, even as the broader war with Iran intensifies. What this means for you is simple. The dynamics on the ground just tightened, and markets are already reacting. But this is where it gets serious. The success of the mission raises immediate questions about how Iran will respond, and whether this accelerates or contains the next phase of escalation. This just changed everything, yet the pattern is familiar. The F-15E Strike Eagle was brought down Friday during active combat operations over southwestern Iran. Both crew members ejected successfully. The pilot was located and extracted within hours. The weapons systems officer, a colonel, landed in more remote, hostile terrain, evading immediate capture for over 36 hours while sustaining injuries from the ejection. Iranian forces raced to locate him. State media showed wreckage, and local officials reportedly offered cash rewards to civilians for information leading to the American crew alive. U.S. Command launched an intensive search and rescue effort. By Saturday night, Special Operations Forces, supported by dozens of aircraft providing cover, suppression, and extraction, moved deep into Iranian territory. The operation succeeded without additional American casualties. Trump announced the outcome early Sunday. "We got him." Here's what you need to understand about the broader timeline. This incident marks the first confirmed loss of a U.S. fighter jet to enemy fire in the current conflict, which escalated sharply after the joint U.S.-Israel campaign began on February 28. For 5 weeks, American and Allied aircraft have conducted strikes across Iran with relative freedom of action. The downing signals that Iranian air defenses, despite sustained degradation, are still capable of occasional lethal hits when conditions align. The rescue itself follows a clear strategic pattern Washington has repeated for decades. No American airman is left behind if recovery is feasible. From Vietnam-era operations to more recent extractions in contested zones, the U.S. military treats personnel recovery as a core mission that overrides many tactical risks. But this is where the story shifts. Conducting a large-scale rescue inside active Iranian airspace, involving hundreds of personnel and dozens of aircraft, crosses a threshold. It is no longer purely defensive search and rescue. It is a demonstration of reach and resolve at a moment when both sides are probing each other's red lines. What happens next is the real story. Whether Tehran views this successful incursion as a humiliation that demands immediate retaliation, or as a calculated risk they must now factor into their survival strategy. Most people are missing this connection. The speed and scale of the rescue were only possible because U.S. and Allied forces already maintained significant air and special operations presence in the theater. That presence is now being used not just for offense, but for high-stakes personnel recovery deep behind enemy lines. Right now, this signals a sharper edge to the conflict. Here's exactly what unfolded step by step. On Friday, during a deep strike mission, an F-15E Strike Eagle was hit by Iranian ground-based air defenses, likely a modernized surface-to-air missile system that had survived earlier suppression efforts. Both crew ejected safely at high altitude. The pilot landed in an area quickly secured by Allied forces and was extracted the same day. The weapons systems officer, however, came down in more rugged, Iranian-controlled terrain near the strike zone. Iranian military and paramilitary units immediately began a ground search. For over 36 hours, the colonel evaded detection while injured, using standard survival protocols. U.S. Central Command tracked his beacon and coordinated a multi-layered rescue. Dozens of aircraft, including fighters for air cover, electronic warfare planes for suppression, tankers for endurance, and special operations helicopters or tilt rotors for the actual pickup, were committed. The operation required real-time intelligence, suppression of nearby threats, and rapid exfiltration under potential fire. The extraction succeeded cleanly. No additional U.S. losses reported. President Trump confirmed the outcome with the phrase, "We got him," emphasizing the Airman is safe and sound. But this is where the story changes. The mission was executed inside sovereign Iranian territory during active hostilities. That alone elevates the incident beyond a standard combat loss. Iran lost the propaganda prize of parading or holding an American officer. At the same time, the scale of U.S. assets committed reveals how seriously Washington treats any threat to its personnel, even as it continues offensive operations. Conflicting narratives are already emerging. Iranian officials claim the jet was downed by their indigenous defenses and accuse the U.S. of violating international law with the rescue incursion. U.S. statements frame it as a routine, lawful recovery of endangered service members in a combat zone. The uncertainty now centers on Iran's next move. Will they attempt to down another aircraft to restore deterrence? Or will they shift to asymmetric responses, proxies, mines in key waterways, or cyber operations to avoid direct confrontation with superior U.S. air power? What happened today could tighten the rules of engagement on both sides in the coming hours. Most people are missing this. The successful rescue removes one immediate pressure point on the Trump administration, but simultaneously demonstrates American willingness to operate deep inside Iran. That demonstration carries its own escalatory weight. This just changed everything in ways most observers are underestimating. The successful rescue of the second crew member inside Iranian territory is not merely a tactical success, it marks a structural shift in how this conflict is being fought. Militarily, it proves that even after weeks of sustained U.S. and Israeli strikes, the United States retains the ability to project power deep into Iran with minimal friction when the objective is personnel recovery. Dozens of aircraft operating in coordinated fashion over hostile airspace, without suffering further losses, underscores the current imbalance in air superiority. Iranian air defenses have been degraded, but not rendered irrelevant, as the initial shootdown demonstrated. Yet the rescue operation bypassed those remaining capabilities through overwhelming support and precise execution. Economically and strategically, the event carries heavier weight. By recovering both crew members, Washington denied Tehran a high-value bargaining chip or propaganda victory that could have been used to rally domestic support or pressure the United States in back-channel negotiations. In modern conflicts, captured personnel often become leverage points that prolong fighting or complicate de-escalation. Removing that variable quickly and cleanly strengthens the U.S. position. Here's what you need to understand. This operation sends a clear message to every actor in the region. The United States will invest significant resources, not just rhetoric, to protect its service members, even when doing so requires crossing into enemy territory during active combat. That commitment level raises the perceived cost of targeting American assets going forward. What changed structurally is the demonstrated reach. Previous rescues in other theaters were often conducted in less defended spaces or with local partner support. Here, the operation occurred in the heart of Iranian-controlled territory against a state adversary with sophisticated, if degraded, defenses. This sets a precedent that U.S. forces can and will operate inside Iran when necessary. But this is where it gets serious for the broader conflict. The rescue reinforces American credibility with its own forces and allies, while simultaneously humiliating Iranian command. Regimes facing internal pressure often respond to such public setbacks with escalated action to restore face. At the same time, it may deter future Iranian attempts to capture rather than kill, knowing the U.S. will come in force to retrieve personnel. The global significance lies in the signal this sends beyond the Middle East, particularly to peer competitors watching how Washington handles personnel risk in high-intensity operations. Most people are missing this. Today's events didn't just resolve a tactical problem. They redefined the operational boundaries of this war in real time. What happened today reveals the hidden calculus driving decisions on both sides. The Trump administration authorized a high-risk rescue deep inside Iran for one overriding reason. Personnel accountability is non-negotiable in American military doctrine. Leaving a colonel behind would have signaled weakness to U.S. forces operating in the theater, eroded morale, and handed Iran a strategic asset worth far more than the tactical cost of the mission. By committing dozens of aircraft and special operations assets, Washington chose to pay the operational premium up front rather than risk long-term credibility damage. Iran, for its part, faces a different constraint. Its leadership understands that allowing the U.S. to conduct such an incursion unchallenged undermines the narrative of sovereign defense they have pushed since the conflict began. Yet mounting an immediate, large-scale counter-operation against the rescue force risked even heavier losses given the demonstrated U.S. air cover. The decision to let the extraction proceed without a major clash suggests Tehran is still calibrating, prioritizing survival of regime assets over immediate retaliation. Here's what you need to understand about the deeper strategy. This rescue fits a classic pattern of escalation management. The U.S. is willing to accept tactical risk to protect its people and project resolve, while avoiding actions that would force Iran into an all-or-nothing response. Tehran, meanwhile, has shown it can still impose costs, downing a sophisticated fighter jet, but lacks the capacity to prevent high-value U.S. operations when Washington commits fully. Both sides are therefore operating in a gray zone, where each probes the other's tolerance without triggering irreversible escalation. The real motive behind the speed and scale of the rescue goes beyond the individual airmen. It serves as a live demonstration to Iran's proxies and to China that American reach remains formidable, even under pressure. For the Trump team, recovering the officer cleanly also removes a domestic political vulnerability at a sensitive moment. But this is where things shift. The success of the mission may encourage more aggressive U.S. strike planning in the short term, knowing recovery options exist. Conversely, it likely hardens Iranian resolve to improve air defenses or shift toward asymmetric tools, drones, missiles, or naval mines that are harder to counter with rescue-style operations. The pattern we see repeating is one of measured risk-taking. Washington pushes operational boundaries, Iran absorbs the blow and looks for asymmetric counters. Most people are missing this layer. Today's events were not random heroism. They were a deliberate strategic signal wrapped in a humanitarian mission designed to shape the adversary's risk calculations for the weeks ahead. But the other side tells a different story. From Tehran's perspective, the entire episode exposes American aggression and vulnerability in equal measure. Iranian officials are already framing the downing of the F-15E as proof that their air defenses remain effective despite weeks of intense bombardment. They portray the U.S. rescue operation not as a daring success, but as a desperate incursion into sovereign Iranian territory that violates international norms and reveals Washington's disregard for borders when its own personnel are at risk. In their narrative, the fact that it took dozens of aircraft and special operations forces to extract one injured officer highlights how heavily the United States must rely on overwhelming force, even for a single recovery. Iranian state media is likely emphasizing that the Airman was operating deep inside Iran as part of an illegal bombing campaign, turning the crew member from hero to aggressor in domestic eyes. The quick recovery is spun as evidence that the U.S. fears the consequences of leaving anyone behind, suggesting deeper concerns about morale and domestic support for the conflict. Here's what you need to understand. This alternative framing serves a clear purpose. It allows the Iranian regime to maintain internal cohesion by presenting the conflict as a heroic defense against a bullying superpower. It also buys time to reorganize defenses and rally proxy networks without appearing weak. By accusing the U.S. of escalation through the rescue itself, Tehran attempts to shift global diplomatic pressure back onto Washington and potentially complicate allied support. Yet this view contains its own miscalculation. Overplaying the violation of sovereignty card risks highlighting Iran's inability to prevent the operation on its own soil. If the regime pushes too hard on propaganda without delivering a tangible response, it could erode credibility among hardliners who demand retaliation. The diplomatic angle is equally delicate. Back-channel talks, already strained, now carry the added weight of this incident. Iran may use the rescue to argue that the U.S. is the provocateur, seeking concessions or a pause in strikes. Washington, conversely, will point to the clean extraction as evidence of restraint, claiming it avoided broader destruction while still protecting its people. What happens next is the real story here. Whether Iran's leadership chooses the propaganda win and measured asymmetric response, or feels compelled by domestic pressure to attempt a more visible counterstrike that could spiral the conflict further. Most people are missing this tension. The two narratives are colliding in real time, and the side that controls the story may gain the upper hand in the next phase of escalation. What this means for you is already showing up in the numbers. The successful U.S. rescue operation inside Iran has tightened risk premiums across energy markets. Overnight trading saw crude oil futures tick higher by nearly 2%, as traders priced in the possibility of renewed Iranian attempts to disrupt shipping or launch asymmetric attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. Even a modest supply shock from the region can push gas prices at the pump by 10 to 30 cents per gallon within days, depending on how long the uncertainty lasts. Here's what you need to understand about the direct connection to your wallet. The broader U.S.-Iran conflict has already disrupted oil flows and raised insurance costs for tankers. Today's events remove one uncertainty, the captured Airman, but introduce another, Iranian retaliation. Any move to mine sea lanes, harass shipping, or activate proxy attacks on Gulf infrastructure raises the specter of a temporary supply squeeze. That feeds straight into higher refining margins elevated transportation costs, and ultimately food prices, since diesel powers much of the global supply chain. Jobs are also at stake. Sectors tied to international shipping, aviation, and manufacturing feel the ripple effects first. Extended tensions mean higher input costs for companies already navigating inflation, which can lead to slower hiring or delayed investment. For American consumers, the cumulative impact shows up in everyday expenses, groceries, commuting, heating in winter, precisely when many households are still recovering from previous energy spikes. Markets reacted swiftly. Defense stocks rose on expectations of sustained operations, while broader indices showed caution over potential inflation pass-through. Global investors are watching closely because this conflict no longer feels fully contained. Each high-profile incident like the jet downing and rescue reminds everyone how quickly regional friction can translate into worldwide economic pressure. Most people are missing this. The rescue may have been a military success, but it keeps the conflict in an elevated state where volatility becomes the new normal. Even if no immediate major disruption occurs, the sustained risk environment keeps energy prices elevated and inflation expectations sticky, directly affecting mortgage rates, borrowing costs, and household budgets. Right now, this signals that geopolitics is once again reaching into daily life. The tighter the confrontation becomes, the faster those costs travel from the Persian Gulf to your gas tank and grocery bill. But this is where it gets serious for the months ahead. Right now, this signals the conflict has entered a more dangerous calibration phase. In the short term, next 48 to 96 hours, Iran faces a stark choice. The regime can absorb the humiliation of the successful U.S. rescue and respond with asymmetric tools. Increased harassment by proxies in Iraq and Syria, drone swarms against Gulf shipping, or limited missile strikes on less defended targets. These moves allow Tehran to save face without triggering an all-out U.S. counter-escalation. A more direct response, such as another attempt to down U.S. aircraft or mine key waterways, carries far higher risk given America's demonstrated ability to operate inside Iranian airspace. Washington, having recovered both crew members cleanly, now holds stronger tactical momentum. The Trump administration is likely to use this window to intensify pressure, expanding strike packages against remaining Iranian air defense nodes or nuclear-related sites, while signaling openness to de-escalation only on favorable terms. The rescue operation has removed a key vulnerability, freeing U.S. planners to operate with slightly less concern for immediate personnel losses. Midterm, over the next 2 to 4 weeks, two primary scenarios emerge. First, controlled escalation. Iran tests boundaries with indirect attacks, the U.S. responds with precise, high-impact strikes, and both sides gradually exhaust immediate options. Oil markets remain volatile, but do not spike into full crisis territory. Gas prices settle 15 to 40 cents higher than pre-incident levels, with ripple effects on inflation and consumer spending. Second, miscalculation spiral. An Iranian retaliation succeeds in causing visible damage or casualties, prompting a heavier U.S. response that targets regime stability assets. This path risks drawing in more regional actors and pushing energy prices sharply upward, with broader consequences for global growth. The most probable near-term outcome is measured tit-for-tat action. Tehran understands the military imbalance too well to invite regime-ending confrontation, while Washington prefers decisive but contained pressure over open-ended war. Yet history shows that in such high-tension environments, accidents or domestic political pressures can override rational restraint. What happens next is the real story. The rescue bought Washington time and credibility, but it also narrowed the margin for error. Every future strike or Iranian countermove will now be measured against this precedent of deep U.S. operations inside Iran. The conflict is no longer purely about territory or ideology. It has become a test of who can impose cost while managing escalation. Most people are missing this. We are watching a live experiment in 21st century limited war, where personnel recovery, air superiority, and economic signaling matter as much as battlefield victories. The coming days will reveal whether both sides can keep this calibrated, or whether today's success quietly opened the door to the next, more serious phase. If you found this analysis valuable, drop a like and subscribe for continuing coverage as this situation develops. Let me know in the comments what aspect concerns you most: energy prices, escalation risk, or the broader strategic picture.